When you look at the Florida Gators, what they did in the 2019 season, this was a pretty good year for the Florida Gators. They were this close for potentially competing for an SEC championship game. They were this close to potentially competing for a playoff game and maybe a national championship. The team is not far off, man. This team is not far off at all for competing for becoming a national championship contender. They're very close. And if you look at the Florida Gators, what they're bringing back in 2020, if you're a Gator fan, you have to be excited about the future of your program. But recapping what happened in 2019, you start off playing against Miami, the first college football game of the year, prime time, bright lights in the Garden, Miami versus Florida, two legendary programs. Very, very sloppy game, but Florida comes away and win that game. And ever since then, the team really took off, right? You beat almost every opponent in the SEC East. Obviously, they haven't done that in a while. They only had one loss, which was against the Georgia Bulldogs, I'm going to talk about in a second, and then they lost to the national champions in LSU. But they dominated everybody else that they played on their schedule. Kentucky was a close game, but they got that. But they got it done. You beat Missouri, you beat Tennessee, you beat South Carolina, you beat everybody else in your path in the SC East, and that was the first thing, was that there was no question that the two best teams are Florida and Georgia. I think another good thing for the Florida Gators that they also had was their identity at the quarterback position. Now, obviously, Felipe Franks going into this year was expected to have a much more improved year, especially what he did in 2018, and it didn't start off hot for Felipe Franks. It just didn't. He eventually got hurt. He was out for the year. And then this kid out of nowhere, and Kyle Trask, comes in out of nowhere, and he takes the offense that Dan Mullen had established. He takes it to another level. The offense becomes more explosive. There's more continuity between him and the rest of the players, including at the running back position, the receiving position. You start to see more weapons in this receiving corps start to really have some exposure. You saw guys like Trayvon Grimes really stepped up. You saw guys like Jacob Copeland, who didn't have a lot of yards, but you saw some potential out of Jacob Copeland. You saw Tyree Cleveland and Swan and Van Jefferson. You saw that these guys are really, really good players, and you really got to saw the best out of those players with Kyle Trask at quarterback. There was an emergence and a star in Kyle Pitts, who might just be the best tight end in all of football. Like, we talk about that next version of a Gronkowski, of a Noah of a guy that was drafted like a Noah Fant or a T.J. Hawkinson last year. You talk about a George Kittle, Travis Kelce type of player. No, Kyle Pitts could very well is very well he could very well be that guy next year if he decides to declare. He is the best receiver, and especially the best receiving tight end in all of college football. He emerged as a star this year. So the fact that you're getting a guy the fact that these players saw that exposure, and especially because Kyle Trask helped them with that exposure, is awesome. And having a guy like Kyle Trask back, an experienced veteran, one of the best quarterbacks, if not maybe the best quarterback in the SEC coming back, you got to be excited if you're a Florida fan. I would say the weaknesses of the offense is the offensive line. Now, the good news for Florida fans is that 4 out of the 5 guys are coming back. But these guys weren't good last year. Let's be honest, they weren't good. We saw some improvements. We saw some times where, hey, maybe this offensive line can get it together, and maybe they can be like what LSU was, right? 2 years of playing together, mediocre, and then all of a sudden becoming an elite offensive line unit. This offensive line could do it, but this offensive line was not good. It just wasn't good. And we really saw this team get exposed against teams like Georgia, against teams like LSU, where they couldn't really run the ball at the moments where they needed to, right? LaMichael Pirine was that bell cow running back, a guy that you thought would be your 1,000-yard rusher, and he really couldn't get it going because of just the weakness of your offensive line. So that's something that they're going to have to address, but it's a good thing that you have veterans that started for the majority of your games coming back. Defensively is going to be the strength of this class. It's going to be the strength of this class. You look at the defensive side of the ball. You got guys like Jeremiah Moon, Chris Bogle, Muhammad Diabe. You look at guys like Kalair Elam. Just taking a look at my notes here. You guys like Kyrie Campbell on the defensive line coming back. You got guys like Vontrell Miller, who I saw a lot, who was a really more of a rotational player. You saw him play in different sides, but he did his thing. Zachary Carter, Marco Wilson, who was again a couple of years ago was one of the best cornerbacks in all college football. He was more of a star type of guy that played a lot in the nickel. You can play him out wide if you wanted to, but one of your physical run stuffers who had an off year in my opinion. But you had that player, that type of caliber of a player in Marco Wilson coming back on the defensive side of the ball. These guys on the defensive side of the ball were crazy good. And there's a reason why the Gators had 49 sacks last year, right? It wasn't just because of the two players like Jonathan Grenard. Jabari Zuniga didn't even play the majority of the season, or if he did, he didn't really make that much noise because he was hurt pretty much the entire year. But these guys, the backup players, rotational players, guys that had significant roles up front, they're coming back. They do lose some leadership. It's more 50-50 on your defense. But again, the good thing for the Gators was that there was a lot more pieces in the rotation that will be stepping in those starting roles and will be helping out your defense. The strength of this team could very well be their defense like it was last year. But you have a mixture of your offense. You now have some explosiveness with Kyle Trask, right? You got guys like Kadarius Toney on the offensive side of the ball, Jacob Copeland, and there's some talent in. They got a transfer from Penn State, former 5-star, and Justin Shorter. You guys got some guys in your recruiting class for the past couple of cycles that are very talented, 4- or 5-star caliber guys that can step up and take those roles that we saw from Van Jefferson, Tyree Cleveland, Freddie Swan. Trayvon Grimes is still there, who I thought arguably was the best receiver on your team. And then obviously Kyle Pitts, who's the best tight end in all of college football. Can Florida take that next step as far as beating Georgia? We saw this team beat Auburn. We saw this team dominate really the SEC East, but they couldn't get through Georgia. They couldn't really in LSU. LSU was the exception, but Georgia is a team that they have struggled with for the past 3 years. Can they get past Georgia? Because if you're going to win the East, you have to beat Georgia on that neutral site field. You have to do it. You got to do it. You got to beat the Georgia Bulldogs. If Florida can get past Georgia, they're playing for the SEC championship game and potentially a playoff spot. That's how close Florida has been for the last 2 years. They just can't get through Georgia. They have to get through Georgia in order to get it done. This might be the year where they can do it. Now, obviously, it's going to be tough, but you look at the quarterback situation. You got one of the best head coaches in Dan Mullen. You got some of the best talent in the country. You guys are bringing in another top 10 recruiting class. The majority of your players from the state of Florida, which is arguably the best recruiting spot in this country. I don't know. I mean, if you're a Florida fan, if they don't win the SEC East in 2020, will there be any excuse for why Florida didn't get it done? Especially with Georgia losing a quarterback in Jake Fromm. 2020, if you're a Florida fan, you have to say to yourself, this has to be the year, right? Because if we can't get it done this year, when will we get it done? When will we get past Georgia? Because Georgia is that hump. And they're going to get better, especially with the recruiting classes that they're going to get. So that's the biggest question going into 2020. Can Florida get past Georgia for 1 year and get to that SEC championship game? I don't really see any other threats. Tennessee is a program that can surge, that has a lot of talent, but I just don't know if Tennessee is there yet. I think really the SEC East, it's really down to Florida and Georgia. That's it. But besides that, you look at the talent that they have at the defensive side of the ball. You got to look at the talent they have at the offensive side of the ball. The coaching is there. There's no reason for Florida to not challenge Georgia for the SEC East crown. But anyway, guys, that's all I got for you guys today. If you guys liked the video, hit the like button, share the video, and subscribe. Florida fans, I got more content, more previews of your team. So stay tuned for those in the future. But anyway, guys, that's all I got for you guys today. This is Gen 716. I'll catch you guys later. Peace.